Out of the 8 Nazi extermination camps that were operational during the course of the Second World War, few are more mysterious than Belzec. In many ways, Belzec symbolized the end of the line for the Jews of Europe. Despite its tiny size and innocent rural exterior, Belzec's design embodied the radicalization of Nazi policy against the Jews, and in particular, the Jews of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, or the Ostjuden. It existed for no other purpose than mass murder, and while it wasn't the first of its kind to do so, as that title belongs to Chelmno, Belzec was the first to open as part of Operation Reinhard. Operation, or Action Reinhard, was the plan to annihilate the Jews of the General Government, which was the major Nazi-occupied region of Poland. Although the plan also partially envisioned Heinrich Himmler's dream of funneling the able-bodied Jews into massive concentration camps, which was partly realised at Majdanek, the primary function of Operation Reinhard was the annihilation of Polish Jewry, which was later extended to all across Europe. Belzec, which was the first Action Reinhard death camp to open, set the blueprint of what was to come. True, Belzec was primitively designed when compared with Sobibor and Treblinka, which were the latter 2 Action Reinhard death camps to open. Nevertheless, Belzec still fulfilled its purpose, and with brutal efficacy. In the span of just under 9 months, the Belzec death camp murdered around 500,000 people, with the vast majority of these victims perishing in Belzec's exhaust fume gas chambers. Although Belzec was the 3rd most prolific extermination camp during the course of the Second World War, coming in behind Treblinka and Auschwitz, relatively little is known about the camp. This is primarily because Belzec had only 2 survivors, or, at the very least, 2 survivors who testified about their experiences after the war. One of these men, who went by the name of Rudolf Raeder, serves as the primary account of what transpired at Belzec. While we do have SS testimonies about the camp, most notably of course being the report of SS Untersturmführer Kurt Gerstein, we are relatively deprived of primary sources when compared with Sobibor and Treblinka. Thankfully for historians, Raeder's testimony is especially detailed, and thus serves as a strong point of chronological reference during Belzec's so-called second phase of annihilation, which commenced in the August of 1942. This is especially useful for me, as it was during this period, from August 1942 until November-December 1942, that SS Chief Heinrich Himmler potentially made 2 visits to Belzec. Earlier in this mini-series, when I looked at Auschwitz, Sobibor and Treblinka, I noted upon the relative likelihood and accuracy of both the timing and actuality of Himmler's visits to these facilities. It is basically guaranteed that Himmler visited Auschwitz twice, Treblinka once, and Sobibor at least once. It is actually highly likely that Himmler visited Sobibor twice, with sources converging on the notion that the Reichsführer visited the camp on July 19, 1942, as well as his February 12, 1943 visit. Such confidence concerning both actuality and dating is not found when one considers Himmler's potential visits to Belzec. Himmler's supposed latter visit to the camp, which is estimated to have occurred any time from mid-October to early November 1942, is far more likely, thanks to the testimony of the aforementioned Rudolf Raeder, as well as biographical knowledge we have on SS Gruppenführer Fritz Katzmann, who also visited Belzec around this time, presumably with Himmler. Furthermore, we know that SS Standartenführer Wilhelm Pfannenstiel, who visited Belzec twice, came to the camp for the second time in the autumn of 1942, which converges nicely with Rudolf Raeder's testimony of Himmler's visit, which we will get to shortly. However, it is also possible that Himmler visited Belzec in the August of 1942, as part of his inspection of the Lvov ghetto. According to the late Robert Kulevec, Himmler visited the Lvov ghetto on August 17, 1942, to witness the great action that was taking place that month. From August 10, 1942, until August 30, 1942, an estimated 55,000 Jews were deported from the Lvov ghetto to the Janowska concentration camp, from which they would then be deported on further to Belzec. Although Kuvalek cedes that no documentation supports the notion that Himmler actually witnessed the roundups and deportation process, he logically assumes that as Himmler was in Lvov at this time, that he would have been shown the process, presumably by Odilo Globoknik. August the 17th is an interesting date, as it is the same day that SS Obersturmführer Kurt Gerstein and SS Standartenführer Wilhelm Pfannenstiel visited Belzec to inspect the gassing procedures that were occurring in the camp. One might think that Himmler would have accompanied them on this visit, but neither man mentioned Himmler's presence, which is certainly a presence that one would note upon. Robin O'Neill theorises that if Himmler did visit Belzec in August, then he would have visited on August the 16th, 1942, the day before Gerstein visited the camp. Geographically, this makes logical sense, as the Lvov ghetto and Belzec death camp were in close proximity to one another. Therefore, given that Himmler was already in the area of Lvov, it would make sense for him to inspect all the frontiers of the Holocaust in the immediate region, including Belzec. According to the testimony of Istashi Ukrainsky in October 1945, the Polish railway worker noted that Himmler visited Belzec in the August of 1942, under the guard of a, quote, heavy escort, unquote. Again, this visit is alleged, and very hard to prove or disprove either way. Given that Himmler visited Sobibor the month prior, on July the 19th, 1942, it would make logical sense for the Reichsführer SS to then visit Belzec, to inspect how that respective death camp was operating. Given that Kuvalek argued that Himmler was in Lvov around this time, it geographically also makes sense for Himmler to have visited Belzec, even if it was only briefly. The nature of this potential visit, however, is totally mysterious. Given that August was a very busy month for Belzec's gas chambers, if Himmler did visit then he most likely would have witnessed a gassing, or at the very least, the burial process, which he certainly did witness during his autumn 1942 tour of the camp. In my personal opinion, I would err on the side of this particular visit being misdated, and thereby possibly being conflated with his autumn 1942 visit. I reason this because at the time of Himmler's alleged August 1942 visit to Belzec, Action 1005, the plan to obfuscate genocide through the mass burning of bodies, had been in operation for just under 2 months, with SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel having initiated such processes at the Chelno extermination camp. Therefore, it seems that if Himmler did visit Belzec at this time, then he would have likely remarked to the Belzec SS to initiate Action 1005. Yet the burning of corpses didn't start in Belzec until the first week of November 1942, which was immediately after Himmler's second visit. Now, of course, Himmler might have only mentioned it in passing to Belzec's commandant at the time, that being SS Hauptsturmführer Gottlieb Hering, that Action 1005 would need to be implemented in the camp later down the line, during this alleged visit to the camp in August 1942. Alternatively, maybe Himmler was only interested in witnessing Belzec's killing capacity during this 1942 visit in the month of August, rationalising that Action 1005 wasn't necessary in Belzec as of this current time. But, seeing as Himmler had effectively instigated Action 1005 in Sobibor during his visit to that camp in the July of 1942, of which he didn't return until February of the next year, it seems likely that Himmler would have done the same in Belzec, had he visited the camp in the August of 1942. And, if he did, why would he feel it necessary to then only return to the camp a few months later? It makes this first visit seem somewhat unnecessary. Although, I could just be overthinking it, and it could simply be the case that, as Himmler was in the area at the time, the Reichsführer thought he might as well pay a visit to Belzec, given its importance within the sphere of the final solution. Regardless of one's interpretation, we can be entirely sure that this alleged visit in the August of 1942 is shrouded in mystery. What is far more likely, and better documented, was Himmler's visit to Belzec in the autumn of 1942. Rudolf Reder, who had arrived in Belzec from the Lvov ghetto on either August the 18th or August the 19th, 1942, had been selected to work as one of the so-called Totenjuden, or the Jews of Death. Despite his advanced age of 61, Reder's ability to understand German made him exceptionally useful to them, and he was thus spared from the camp's gas chambers. As one of the Totenjuden, raiders' job was to bury the bodies of the murdered in Belzec's gaping burial pits. Rader, who escaped from Belzec at the end of November 1942, recalls the visit from SS Chief Heinrich Himmler. Quote, "The biggest event for those thugs was Himmler's visit. It took place sometime towards the middle of October. That day, we knew that something unusual was afoot. There was an air of secrecy all around. Everything was done with great speed. Even the process of murder took a much shorter time that day. Ehrman announced, 'A distinguished guest is coming. Everything must be in order.' He did not elaborate, but we all knew from the whispered exchanges of the askers. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Himmler arrived, escorted by General Major Katzmann, the butcher of Lvov in eastern Galicia, and 10 Gestapo. Ehrman and others led him to the gas chambers, just in time for him to see the corpses falling out. A terrible pile of bodies of very young people, small children, and babies. The Jewish death commander dragged the corpses along while Himmler stood watching. He stayed and watched for about half an hour, and then left the camp. I saw how pleased and uplifted the Gestapo felt. I saw their joy, and I heard them laughing. I also heard them talking about promotions." Unquote. Something that is important to note about Rader's testimony, and his book for that matter about his time in Belzec, is that he refers to the Belzec SS as the Gestapo. Now, the Gestapo never worked in the extermination camps. They may well have helped get Jews onto the trains and organise deportations, but they never worked in any of the death facilities. His reference to them as Gestapo is Rader's misinterpretation. Whenever he says Gestapo, he really means SS. Whether or not Himmler's visit to Belzec took place in mid-October 1942, or towards the end of October, or even the start of November, is debatable. Either way, Rader's reference to Himmler having witnessed the aftermath of a gassing makes complete sense, given the abundance of transports that arrived at Belzec in October 1942 and early November 1942. Furthermore, his reference to the Belzec SS talking about promotions after Himmler's visit also converges nicely with the ramifications of Himmler's visits to Sobibor and Treblinka in February-March 1943. After Himmler had visited Treblinka, he ordered the promotions of all of the high-ranking Operation Reinhardt SS, that being the commandants and their deputies. Belzec's commandant at the time, Gottlieb Hering, and his deputy, Gottfried Schwartz, were promoted as part of Himmler's promotions of the Reinhardt SS, supporting Rader's testimony that he overheard the Belzec SS discussing the possibility of such. A visit from Himmler to Belzec around this period also makes sense, given that SS Hauptsturmführer Gottlieb Hering commenced Action 1005 in the camp in the first week of November 1942, which should have been immediately after Himmler's visit in either mid to late October or even early November 1942. Hering assigned SS Schachführers Fritz Toscher and Heinrich Klee to oversee the operation, with the help of SS Schachführer Lorenz Hackenholt, the man who operated Belzec's gas chambers. Much like at Sobibor, an excavator was brought in to aid with exhumation, and pyres were assembled, based upon Blobel's blueprints, to implement the cremation process. At the beginning of December, a second pyre was constructed. Whether or not any of the Belzec SS attended the cremation classes that were being held in the Janowska concentration camp, or if SS Schachführer Herbert Floss, one of Blobel's body-burning experts, ever made a visit to the camp, is not recorded. But it is almost certain that external expertise was necessary to aid in Action 1005's implementation. Floss's potential visit is a theory supported by the testimony of SS Schachführer Heinrich Klee, who noted that an excavator was brought to Belzec from Sobibor, which is where Floss was working at the time. Given that such cooperation was taking place, it would have made logical sense for Floss to perhaps accompany the arrival of the specific excavator, to show the Belzec SS how to properly exhume and cremate corpses. Throughout the course of the Second World War, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler is noted to have made visits to 4 of the 8 Nazi extermination camps. He visited Auschwitz and Sobibor twice, Treblinka once, and Belzec, most likely, only once. Himmler didn't visit either Semlin or Mali Trostenitz, and likely didn't visit Chelmno either, although he did visit the Lodz ghetto area on April the 16th, April the 17th, 1942, in particular visiting the Polish town of Cholo to meet with Baltic Germans who had recently been settled there. Given that Cholo was a mere 10-minute drive from the Chelmno extermination camp, Himmler might have visited the camp on this date. However, I'm not aware of any record or testimony about such a visit, nor are prominent Chelmno historians like Patrick Montague, so it seems rather unlikely, but still entirely possible. Other than Chelmno, it is also rather ambiguous as to whether or not Himmler ever visited the Majdanek or Lublin extermination camp, as Himmler made multiple visits to Lublin throughout the course of the Second World War, most notably, of course, being his visit to Lublin on July the 18th, 1942, in which he met with Odile Globoknik to discuss the progress of Operation Reinhard. Potentially, during this period in Lublin, Himmler was then shown the Majdanek concentration camp, which he ordered Globoknik to include within the exterminatory aspect of Operation Reinhard. On July the 19th, Himmler was shown both the Treblinka concentration camp and the Sobibor extermination camp. But it is possible that he was also shown Majdanek after these tours, or even on the afternoon or early evening of July the 18th. Himmler then returned to Lublin in February of 1943, in anticipation of his second visit to Sobibor. Once again, the Reichsführer SS might have visited Majdanek during this period, but once again, it is seemingly unconfirmed to me as of now. As for the death camps that we can confidently assert that Himmler did visit, their fates were as follows. Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army on January the 27th, 1945. During the course of its long and complex history, Auschwitz murdered an estimated 1.1 million people, with the majority of its victims being Jews. Sobibor was operational until October the 14th, 1943, when the camp was forced to close following a successful revolt, organized by Leon Feldhendler and Alexander Paczewski. Treblinka was operational until about the end of October 1943, and still conducted gassings on August the 18th and August the 19th, 1943, despite the camp suffering its own mass revolt on August the 2nd, 1943. Alas for Belzec, the camp had no revolt and no liberation. Once Action 1005 had been successfully implemented in the camp, and the grounds were sufficiently levelled and planted over, the remaining Jewish inmates at Belzec were deported to Sobibor in late June 1943, where, immediately upon their arrival into the camp, they were gunned down on the platform. Out of the roughly 500,000 people that walked through the gates of Belzec, only 2 survived. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this mini-series on Himmler's visits to Auschwitz, Belzec and Sobibor to be both informative and interesting. If you missed parts 1, 2 or 3 in this mini-series, in which I covered Himmler's visits to Auschwitz, Sobibor and Treblinka respectively, then look for the link to the playlist in the video description. If you enjoyed this content, then make sure to like and subscribe, so that you don't miss out on the notification for my next upload. As always, if you have any questions, then please let me know in the comment section below. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.